you're born into the Hidden Sand Village, you get one of two choices. Either be a cactus farmer or be a puppeteer. Well, I guess of course you could be the guy that got his face mask kicked off by Madara, but that's not really a popular choice. Because unfortunately, the Hidden Sand Village has the worst economy out of all of the hidden villages in Naruto. And a bad economy means less food and less people, as the Hidden Sand also has the smallest population out of any of the hidden villages in Naruto. And because the Hidden Sand Village is located in, well, a desert, farming and agriculture aren't really an option, which means that almost for the entirety of the Hidden Sand's existence, they've had to rely almost entirely on ninja work to provide their economy any stimulus. But the problem is, when your entire economy is built around ninja work, you really don't want to lose your ninjas. And therefore, the second Kazekage, Shimon, found out a way to weaponize puppets based off the puppets that he saw used for entertainment in the Hidden Sand Village. And by learning how to control anywhere from 1 to 300 puppets, all of a sudden the Hidden Sand Village no longer had a shinobi issue, as one skilled puppet master could equate to 10 shinobis on the battlefield. Experienced puppet masters could hide themselves on battlefields while controlling puppets that were doing all of the dirty work for them. And while the destruction of a puppet wasn't ideal, it wasn't the loss of a shinobi. And thus the Hidden Sand, with a revolutionary technological advancement, was able to stay relevant in the market of the Hidden Leaf villages, being able to offer their ninja work at a price that was at least competitive comparatively to the other ninja villages, which is why the Hidden Sand still exists. Granitio was the first truly relevant puppeteer in the Hidden Sand Village, an absolute stalwart of the community who quite honestly dragged the Hidden Sand through the Second and Third Great Shinobi World Wars. He went toe-to-toe with the likes of Hanzo the Salamander and Sakamo Hatake, with a myriad of different poisons being so threatening that Tsunade had to dedicate her entire war effort in the Second Great Shinobi World War to counteracting said poisons. But we've already made a video about Granitio, and if we're being real, it's one of my favorite videos of all time because Granitio is one of the most important cogs in the tapestry of Naruto's timeline. But today, I don't want to talk about Granitio, no. Today, I want to talk about the only puppeteer in existence who could be considered equal to or greater than Granitio. And the only puppeteer that could ever be considered even close to or better than Granitio is her own grandson, Sasori. Yeah, that's right, we're doing a you-know-nothing. It's been a while. Today we're taking the deepest of dives into arguably the greatest puppeteer out of the Hidden Sand ever. So sit back, relax, and get your chakra strings out because today, we're learning about Sasori. But before we learn about anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if I could control your hands with chakra threads through this screen, I would drive you over to my other YouTube channel, The Weeb Commander, where I do deep dives on characters from all anime that aren't Naruto or Boruto, as well as a bunch of other things. And speaking of a bunch of other things, while you're going ahead and follow my other YouTube channel, please go ahead and follow my brand new podcast that I'm doing with Danny Mata called Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny break down everything that happened in anime this week. So Sasori, one of the more beloved members of the Akatsuki, yet one of the most reserved. As Sasori was the first member of the Akatsuki to die, it feels as though, to those who loved him, that we didn't get nearly enough time with Sasori. And honestly, I agree with that sentiment. Sasori and Granitio's story are one of the only things that tie us to the early days of the Hidden Sand Village. And because they're really the only perspective we have for the Second and Third Great Shinobi World Wars, it makes the perspective of the Hidden Sand Village during this time period kind of devastating. See, the Hidden Sand Village is by far and away the weakest village, always has been. Both in manpower and tailed beasts, the Hidden Sand Village has never amounted to much, as even in the earliest days of the Hidden Sand Village's formation, sure, they were able to catch Shukaku, but because they caught Shukaku, they never had any other tailed beasts given to them. And if we believe that the tailed beast strength is proportionate to the amount of tails they have, then Shukaku is the weakest. However, this never stopped the Hidden Sand from participating in world wars, and that's mostly because the Hidden Sand had to participate in these great wars in order to hopefully acquire fertile land from the other hidden villages. But unfortunately, desperation doesn't cause a huge uptick in power. And in no Great Shinobi World War was that more present for the Hidden Sand Village than the Second Great Shinobi World War. See, Sasori is actually quite old, being born a couple of years before the Second Great Shinobi World War, meaning at the time of his death, he's almost 40. That's not a shot at my elder millennial and Gen X fans. I'm not saying that 35 is old. I'm just saying he didn't look like a 35-year-old. Though if you're over 30, start planning your funeral now. This, however, was a very unfortunate time for Sasori to be born, as the Second Great Shinobi World War was absolutely devastating for the Hidden Sand. And unfortunately, it was devastating for the Hidden Sand because it was very successful for the Hidden Leaf. See, this is why I love taking a step out of Konoha to do deep dives on characters who weave the fabric of Naruto. Because within the confines of the First, Second, and Third Great Shinobi World Wars, there was really no good guys or bad guys. They were land battles. They were battling over resources. And in the Second Great Shinobi World War, when the Hidden Sand was desperate for resources, Konoha crushed them. Specifically, Sakamo Hatake crushed them. You see, it was in the Second Great Shinobi World War that Sakamo Hatake, Kakashi's father, gained the moniker the White Fang, as even just seeing Sakamo Hatake with his white chakra blade on the battlefield was a death sentence to all who had the misfortune of laying eyes on him. And Sakamo Hatake made this name for himself in the Hidden Sand, as Sakamo Hatake led an offensive into the Hidden Sand to pacify their attempts to steal fertile land from the Land of Fire. And while this is seen as an uproarious victory in the Land of Fire, in the Land of Sand, what it did was take a very young boy's parents away from him. See, while Sakamo Hatake was beating back a desperate and dying nation with his counteroffensive in the Land of Sand, two of the Suna shinobi he sliced through were Sasori's parents, orphaning the grandchild of the village's hero, Granny Chiyo. But more than that, eliminating Granny Chiyo's only child and leaving her with just Sasori left in this world, and thus leaving Sasori in Granny Chiyo's care. Sasori, for all intents and purposes, a regular child until being orphaned, was absolutely devastated by the loss of his parents. And Granny Chiyo, seeing this, harkened back to the beginning, the advent of puppeteering in the Hidden Sand, a form of entertainment created by Monzaemon Chikamatsu, where Monzaemon Chikamatsu would attach chakra threads to several puppets and make roarous comedies for groups of children in the Hidden Sand. Fun fact, Monzaemon Chikamatsu is actually a real Japanese playwright. He's often referred to as the Japanese Shakespeare. And the reason that Kishimoto made him a puppeteer in the Naruto universe is because the plays that he wrote were puppet shows. Well, he wrote some puppet plays, which are referred to as jururi, and he also wrote live action plays, which are referred to as kabuki. And Granny Chiyo had been there at the advent of puppeteering, seeing how it started as weaving tales with puppets to entertain the masses. In fact, she was one of the shinobi tasked with converting these puppets into military assets, going on to be the inheritor of the Chikamatsu collection of 10 puppets, the 10 most powerful puppets that Monzaemon Chikamatsu ever created. And Granny Chiyo, understanding these puppets' abilities to entertain and comfort, decided that the best way to comfort Sasori would be through puppeteering. But in a very different sense, it's probably all Granny Chiyo knew how to do, as at this point of her life, she was already in her mid-40s and had lived a life surrounded by puppets, trying to improve them and battling with them on the battlefield. She tried to connect to Sasori in the only way she knew how. And much to Granny Chiyo's happiness, Sasori took to it like a fish to water. Not only was Sasori able to control more puppets than any other child his age, but the intricacy he could apply to his puppets was that of a high-level Jonin. But Sasori took it one step further than simply just being an incredible puppet master. Sasori, from a very young age, began to look for ways to eliminate the weaknesses of puppet jutsu users. See, one of the biggest weaknesses of a puppet jutsu user is if they're discovered. In an ideal circumstance, a puppet jutsu user won't be seen in their battle against other shinobis. They'll find ways to cover themselves up or hide so they can control their puppets from a distance. And Sasori identified that the majority of these puppet jutsu users die upon being detected. Therefore, Sasori dedicated himself to eliminating weaknesses such as these. But Sasori was also being raised by the greatest puppeteer in history, a woman whose true strength not only came from her ability to puppet puppeteers, but also reinvent what puppeteering means, as Granny Chiyo was either using the 10 greatest puppets ever created or making new puppets for herself. Not to mention the constant research and application of brand new poisons to the weapons on her puppets changed the game every time Granny Chiyo entered a battlefield. And thus Sasori saw this innovation from the person who was raising him, and it inspired him to innovate himself. So outside of simply just trying to eliminate the hazards of being a puppet jutsu technique user, Sasori began to dabble in the creation of new puppets. And the first two puppets that he created are incredibly telling about who Sasori was as a core person, because the first two puppets that Sasori ever created were his mother and his father. Sasori decided that making puppets in the likeness of his mother and father may allow him to feel parental love once again, because Sasori was lonely. And this is the main stripe you're gonna see through today's video. Every decision that Sasori ever makes in his life comes back to this key component. Losing his parents at the age that he did emotionally stunted Sasori. It made him feel vulnerable and lonely. And every decision that Sasori ever makes for the rest of his relatively short life is reflective of this. But instead of telling you that's how it is, I'll let his story speak for how it is. After creating his two parents in puppet form, Sasori realized that these puppets didn't give him the paternal love he was looking for. And therefore Sasori decided decided to be done with these puppets, casting them aside, at which point they came into the possession of Granny Chiyo. Sasori, realizing that he would never regain the parental love that he had lost through the loss of his parents, decided to just begin making powerful puppets, like the Black Ant puppet. You know, the puppet with the giant barrel stomach that Kankuro stuffs people in and then Iron Maidens them? That puppet was originally created by Sasori and then inherited by Kankuro. The same could be said for the Crow puppet, or Karasu. This is the puppet whose arms break off into blades to stab into the Black Ant, or the Sanshou puppet, also known as the Salamander. And the Salamander puppet is actually very interesting, because while the Black Ant and Crow are heavily offensive weapons, the Salamander is heavily defensive, with an iron frill to defend the front from attacks, and the tail in the back that's able to whip out to attack people or tuck in to defend the back of the Salamander. Not to mention that the entire Salamander puppet is covered in an iron cloak. Now this puppet is able to hold Sasori or Kankuro inside of it so that they can be defended while controlling their puppets. And therefore this is the first true realization we've seen of Sasori trying to eliminate the weaknesses of puppet jutsu users. But more than anything, it speaks to the true core of Sasori. See, the idea of Sasori and puppet jutsu users align perfectly. If you boil a puppet jutsu user down to their core components, they're somebody who surrounds themselves with as many people as possible while hiding their true self in order to not be vulnerable. Kind of like the trope where the popular kid in school is actually miserable. Sasori, by trying to eliminate the weaknesses of puppet jutsu users, is trying to eliminate vulnerabilities in both himself and puppet jutsu users. Because you have to look at the research that Sasori does in puppet jutsu technique as research into himself. Because by the end of his life, he is a puppet. So inventions like the Salamander are Sasori's first steps towards masking his true self. See, while surrounding himself with as many puppets as possible, he never has to worry about loneliness again. And by destroying every weakness and vulnerability of puppet jutsu users, Sasori can get to a level of strength where he never has to go through the feeling of losing his parents again, that vulnerability he felt as a child. And Sasori became very good at eliminating these weaknesses. See, Sasori committed himself to reinventing what puppeteering meant, much in the same way that Granny Chiyo had. See, Sasori became so effective at creating deadly puppets that during the Third Great Shinobi World War, he became known as Sasori of the Red Sand, where Sasori, just like his parents before him, was battling against other villages trying to encroach into the hidden sand. See, the name Sasori of the Red Sand implies that Sasori was battling on sand. And while we don't know a huge amount about the Third Great Shinobi World War, this at least implies that Suna was fighting a defensive battle, much in the same way as Sasori's parents were fighting a defensive battle against Sakamo Hatake. And thus, for the first time in Sasori's life, he was taking active steps to redeem his parents' death. He was beginning to achieve the level of strength he would need to never feel vulnerable again. But even though strength cures vulnerability, the puppets around Sasori, much in the same way that his mother and father puppet couldn't give him paternal love, weren't curing his loneliness. And thus Sasori began experimenting with the idea of turning people into puppets. See, when a person experiences a massive amount of loneliness and they feel as though there's no way to actually fix it, unfortunately, a lot of people go for the idea of control. What if I was able to control somebody so they could never leave me? What if I was able to puppeteer this person into being by my side forever? It's word for word what serial killers like Jeffrey Dahmer have tried to accomplish, going through scientific experimentations to brainwash people into kind of a zombie state so they'll never leave them again. And what Sasori was doing was no different. Sasori understood that his puppets were strong, and therefore if he created puppets out of those close to him, they could be strong, and they would never be able to leave him. And in no better circumstance is this displayed than when Sasori turns his own best friend into a puppet. See, while this is technically only something that happens in the anime, I believe it's incredibly important to Sasori's growth, and therefore we're going to talk about it. See, in the anime, it was shown to us that Sasori only had one friend, and his friend's name was Komushi. Komushi was a shinobi, like Sasori. However, one day while on border duty, Komushi lost his arm, his right arm, and Sasori, who at this point was a master in all things puppeteering and prosthetics, decided to give Komushi a new right arm, a prosthetic right arm. However, this prosthetic right arm had weapons, like a poison that Sasori had created, which could be used against opponents. However, unfortunately, Komushi ingested this poison and died. Now, usually this would be another incredible moment of loss for Sasori. However, Sasori saw this as an opportunity to transcend death. Instead of feeling lonely and vulnerable as Sasori's only friend lay dead in front of him, Sasori decided to bring him back to life, to beat loneliness with control. And in that moment, Sasori decided that he would turn Komushi into a puppet. And since puppets can always be repaired, he would never have to worry about losing his only friend ever again. However, it soon became very clear to Sasori that turning humans into puppets didn't align with the ideologies of Suna, and therefore he decided to leave, but not before converting his own body into that of a puppet, with only his living core located in the place of his heart acting as the control center for his human puppet body. And this is truly one of the most symbolic things that Sasori ever did. Sasori, who's been trying to eliminate vulnerabilities and weaknesses in puppet jutsu users, decided that being human was also a weakness, that there would be no more effective killing machine than a puppet controlling other puppets, because a puppet can't get hurt. A puppet can always be fixed. A puppet doesn't have vulnerabilities and weaknesses that can kill it. And thus, through this massive revelation that the weakness in puppet jutsu masters is their humanity, Sasori deprived himself of his own. And on top of that, as Sasori had converted his 15-year-old body into that of a puppet, Sasori would forever remain a 15-year-old boy, which is highly symbolic of the lack of his ability to move on from the death of his parents. Sasori continued living life as he wanted to as a missing nin, as he was a missing nin for 20 years. Over 10 years before his own death, he came into combat against the third Kazekage. Third Kazekage, whose name we just do not know, was said to be the strongest Kazekage in the history of Suna. A wielder of magnetic release that allowed him to control iron sand, it said that his defense was impregnable, and yet Sasori killed him. Now, Sasori does admit that the third Kazekage gave him a struggle, but struggle or not, the third Kazekage simply became another weapon in Sasori's repertoire, as Sasori in the 20 years that he was a missing nin was dedicated to one thing and one thing alone: killing and collecting as many strong ninjas as possible to surround himself with. You see, Sasori had no grander goal. He wasn't trying to see the highest form of art like Deidara. He wasn't trying to uncover the lies of the shinobi world like Hisame. He wasn't trying to crack the code of every ninjutsu like Orochimaru. Sasori was on a solitary and endless journey to surround himself with as many people that couldn't leave him as possible. See, Sasori doesn't join the Akatsuki of his own volition. Konan finds Sasori after hearing about his legendary power and tells him to join the Akatsuki, to which Sasori actually declines. Sasori, for all intents and purposes, has no interest in the Eye of the Moon plan. However, Konan makes a deal with him that if they battle and she wins, he'll join. And they battle and he loses, and therefore has to join the Akatsuki, where he was, for arguably the first time in his entire life, surrounded by like-minded people. However, it wasn't until Deidara was introduced to the Akatsuki in a very similar way to Sasori, battling against one of the current members of the Akatsuki and losing, that Sasori truly began to find another friend. You see, we learned from Akatsuki Hiden, the Akatsuki light novel that gave us a chapter about each of the duos in the Akatsuki, that Sasori and Deidara were actually kind of friends. You see, neither Sasori or Deidara really had any true reason to be in the Akatsuki. However, we find out through the duration of this chapter where Deidara and Sasori are going to a clay village to try to find better quality clay for Deidara to make more bombs, that Deidara and Sasori bond over the artisticness of both of their jutsus, as Sasori is a craftsman and Deidara is an artist. But before Sasori would get paired up with the person who would become one of his closest friends in Deidara, he was paired with Orochimaru, who he also was kind of friends with, because both him and Orochimaru were interested in everlasting existence, eternal life, something which Sasori had achieved to a small degree and something that Orochimaru was looking for. And they bonded over this, becoming somewhat friends. However, Orochimaru, in that infinite pursuit of infinite life, tried to take over Itachi's body. And upon failing to take over Itachi's body, Orochimaru left the Akatsuki. And no one took this more personally than Sasori. See, for the rest of Sasori's life, he held an incredible grudge against Orochimaru, because somebody he had trusted, one of the very few people that Sasori had allowed into his life, had abandoned him. And the grudge that he holds towards Orochimaru for abandoning the Akatsuki speaks to the level of hurt that he felt over this event, which is why Sasori sent Kabuto to spy on Orochimaru in the Hidden Sound Village, without knowing that Sasori was actually a double agent against the Akatsuki. On top of this, in the anime, Sasori and Deidara find out the location of Orochimaru's hideout in the Hidden Sand Village, and thus Sasori takes the opportunity to go wipe out the person who abandoned him off the map. And upon finding his hideout, Sasori unleashes his third Kazekage puppet, while Orochimaru summons an Edo Tensei version of the third Kazekage, and we get to see a battle between the puppet created out of the third Kazekage and the Edo Tensei Kazekage. And while the Edo Tensei version does prove to be stronger than the puppet, the third Kazekage recedes control over his brain and breaks the Edo Tensei, forcing Orochimaru to retreat. At which point, Deidara bombs the hideout, hoping to kill Orochimaru because Orochimaru is the only reason he got dragged into the Akatsuki, and Sasori pours through all of the rubble looking for Orochimaru's body. But when they can't find his body, Sasori gets incredibly upset, because for the first time since his parents have died, he's been abandoned and there's nothing he could do about it. Somebody he trusted, somebody he related to, left his life, which the very reason that Sasori makes humans into puppets in the first place is so that they can never do that. The next real time we see Sasori is in his battle against Sakura and Granny Chiyo, which is one of the cooler and more symbolic fights in all of Naruto. A lot of people bag on this fight because they're like,
oh, Sakura's being controlled by Granny Chiyo. How did Sasori actually lose to Sakura?
The true meaning behind this fight is actually kind of beautiful. See, well, on the basis of levels, you can understand that Sasori allows himself to be killed by Granny Chiyo because he doesn't want to kill his last remaining family member. Sure, that's easy enough. It's a bit like looking at an ocean and just going, blue. See, the battle between Granny Chiyo and Sasori is a battle of ideologies. And more importantly, it's a symbolic journey for Sasori. See, in the beginning of the battle, Sasori is in his scorpion puppet. And for a long time, that's what we believed Sasori looked like. However, as the battle continues, it's revealed to us that this scorpion puppet is just that, a puppet that Sasori is controlling from the inside. And just like that, Sasori has eliminated one of the biggest weaknesses of puppet jutsu users. By operating a puppet from the inside, he's able to remain close to his puppets and be on the defensive. But when this puppet is shed, it's a symbolic moment, as Sasori is losing a layer of his defense, as Sasori is taking one step closer to vulnerability. But long before you can get anywhere near Sasori, you need to get through his 300 puppets. 300 puppets that either Sasori just created out of wood and scrap, or from humans. But nonetheless, puppets that Sasori had surrounded himself with, puppets that Sasori had collected, an arsenal of strong weapons that Sasori had created to keep himself safe. Now, these 300 puppets are coming up against Granny Chiyo in her 10 Chikamatsu puppets. And while on the base level, some would argue this is a battle of quality versus quantity, it goes beyond that. The Chikamatsu puppets are built to operate together, being able to fuse together to use incredibly powerful jutsus. In fact, it's stated that the 10 Chikamatsu puppets, when used in conjunction together, are enough to overthrow a castle, while Sasori's puppets are not built to work in conjunction. See, in terms of quality, there's really no difference between Chikamatsu's puppets and Sasori's. Sasori was a puppeteering genius. Any puppet that he made, either from materials or from a human, was an incredible puppet. But the Chikamatsu puppets had each other, while every single one of Sasori's puppets was operating alone. Well, ironically, Sasori had 30 times more puppets than Granny Chiyo, because these puppets were operating as 300 individuals, while Granny Chiyo's were operating as a 10-man team. Sasori ends up losing, which obviously could be looked at as an argument between quantity and quality, but to me, more speaks to the idea of leaning on each other. Granny Chiyo, even though she's significantly older and has less puppets, winning this battle is meant to symbolize how powerful somebody can be when you trust others to help you. There's more meaning to this fight than just that, because Sasori's death in itself is also very symbolic. Well, there's the obvious fact that Sasori sees through Granny Chiyo's final attack and decides not to dodge, which led many to believe that Sasori didn't want to kill his last remaining family. It's actually more of a full circle moment for Sasori. See, Sasori allowing Granny Chiyo to kill him is the first time he ever leaned on somebody else. See, Sasori allowed Granny Chiyo to kill him to end his torturous existence, because Sasori his entire life felt as though he died on the same day as his parents. An endless feeling of loneliness and vulnerability that led to Sasori surrounding himself with as many people that couldn't leave him as possible. But what Sasori failed to realize is that even though he lost his parents, he still had Chiyo, and he had never once tried leaning on her. He had never once tried to absolve the endless feeling of loneliness he felt by being with her. He had never once understood the love that she held for Sasori. And thus, in his final moments, by both abstaining from killing Granny Chiyo, but also allowing her to kill him, he, for the first time, acknowledged the love that she felt for her, and in that moment elected to truly die with his parents. See, when people look at Sasori as a character, it always infuriates me to see the battle between him and Chiyo boil down to quality versus quantity. Sasori's story is a story about isolation, about loneliness, about being afraid to put yourself out into the world, about building barriers between you and everything around you that might possibly and has already hurt you. But the beauty of Sasori's story, even in the tragedy of it all, is that by the end, he finds love. And in the end, he truly doesn't die alone, as Granny Chiyo ending his suffering is truly one of the most painful acts of love somebody can put themselves through. So the next time that anybody tries to boil down Sasori's story to anything less than a very true, relatable, and gripping story, send them to this video and take a minute after this video to count the people in your life that you're grateful towards, and understand that if you're grateful to have them in your life, then they're probably grateful to have you in theirs. Take a second to think on that. While sometimes putting walls between you and everything that might possibly hurt you feels like the best thing you can do, pain, recovery, and love are three of the most beautiful things that a human can go through, so don't deprive yourself from them. And that's it. Sasori's story, the first You Know Nothing that we've done in a matter of months. Do you guys feel as though you know more about Sasori now? Do you feel as though I missed anything in his story? Tell me in the comments below, and while you're down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. How did Orochimaru join the Akatsuki with 3 people who were essentially immortal and not at any point decided, hey, maybe I'll try and take their bodies over?